Okay, starting now.
Fikir coğrafyasından A4 programından herkese merhaba, iyi
Welcome
akşamlar.
to A4
program ile
from the Geography of Thought. We have started our new broadcast season, and
Pazartesi akşamı bugün.
today is the 27th of September, Monday evening.
Yeni yayın dönemi öncesinde de sizlerle beraber olduk. Bu programlardan
And we've been together with you in a couple of meetings even before this time, and it was a very special program. We were together with you with Şahin uçar special program, and today with our new topic headline we are going to be together with Şahin uçar.
Çok kıymetli zamanlarını bizlerle
Professor Dr. Şahin uçar is very generous to share his very precious moments, and thanks to him for accepting our invitation. He'll be with us together in a short while, and in this program Abdülbaki Der, my dear friend Abdülbaki Beyar will be accompanying me. Welcome, hello there. And in this new second year of A4, we are happy to be together with the audiences and spectators. Dear viewers, it was in August that Mr. Şahin uçar accepted our invitation. We made a program with him, and there wasn't a thematic subject in that program. It was just called Şahin uçar special program, but we want to learn the ones who know him with his works and art, but perhaps due to this program some people will get to know him, and it will be like a presentation, and thanks to the professor, he has shared his thoughts and experience and accumulated knowledge and his specialty with the audiences for 2 hours. For sure, when Şahin uçar is mentioned, his specialty is a philosopher of history, a historian and a philosopher of history. And today we have this designated the topic along those lines. And let's say hello to Mr. Abdülbaki, and let's start our program. To Professor Dr. Şahin uçar. Hello, how are you, Mr. Professor Şahin uçar speaking.
Hocam hoş geldiniz. Hayırlı akşamlar.
Welcome to our program, Mr. Şahin uçar.
Hocam sizin de görünmeniz
with you
için bir müjde, ama biliyorum
on the screen is a surprise for us. It's a good surprise for us. It will be a surprise for the viewers as well. So is he?
Şu an yapıyor.
Is he translating it at the moment? Yes, I am.
Evet, tabii programın böyle bir teknik kısmı da var.
So there's a technical aspect to this program as well, and hopefully there will not be anything difficult in that regard in the translation.
Biz A4 olarak Abdülbaki ile yapmış olduğumuz ve 2. yılına girmiş olduğumuz programı 15 günde bir yapıyoruz.
We do this program once in 15 days, and it's like
sizinle de görüştük. Dediğim gibi vaktinizi, değerli zamanınızı,
and you have shared your time with us. Thank you for your generosity. And one of our programs, at least one of them, for a certain while at least, under certain headlines, we'll be speaking with you under certain headlines, and I would like to say thank you for that. Thank you for your generosity. For your So one of our programs will be with Şahin uçar once a month. I'd like to share this news with our audiences. And as I wanted to convey in the beginning, your main specialty is history and philosophy of history, and history is beyond a discipline, actually a subjective, is also a concept that's open to subjective descriptions, and a lot of the people that I've encountered, it's also described badly. So some people have said like the history is the deterioration of morality, or history is bad, or something like that. But for some it's like a science. some philosophers are enemies of history. For example, if you read Rilke, he has big criticisms about history. Philosophers generally don't like history, generally most of them, except the ones who are engaging in philosophy of history, because they think that nothing will come out of history, since Aristotle is another story. Yeah, so there's a description, the change in the like there's a variety of descriptions, and there's also, of course, philosophy. We call it philosophy of history. Let's start with a conceptual entry into this topic. What is the connection of history and philosophy? What does philosophy of history mean here? So, if you know, Hayakawa has a book on popular semantics called Language and Thought and Action, and he says somewhere in there, and I've used one of these things in my book called Meaning of Existence. Let's define our terms so that we can understand what we're talking about. There's a tradition among academicians, but concepts cannot be described by concepts, and even worse, what I've said is that a vision can never be described in words. Words can never be sufficient to express a vision. You can perhaps explain something, it can be intuited perhaps to some extent, understood, but it would require a lot of time. Philosophy of history includes everything. It's something that encompasses everything. It's like a wide. It's not even a discipline. It's a combination of the disciplines. It encompasses all the disciplines because it's all of the activities of humans have passed through history, happened through history, and since all human activities are in question here, a philosopher of history has to take every action of humans, every human activity into account, and all human historical adventure must be taken into account here to evaluate this, right? To evaluate all of the human experience. So it is beyond the discipline because of that. And at one time, when one of my students have asked me to make a doctorate program for philosophy of history, there's no doctorate program for philosophy of history, because you have to be first of all you have to have a large, huge amounts of knowledge, and then you can start philosophy of history. So you can start like studying someone's philosophy of history for and usually that's what it's like in doctorate studies. But like, what does philosophy of history mean? Once there was an interview with me, Şule, and they had asked me a question like this. There was a single page text that I have written, and what I try to explain there is that it's not something like what we understand. It's not what it seems. Like the word implies, like the word kind of gives the impression of. And let me finish with the words of a Sufi mystic. If something is so beyond human knowledge, and it's impossible to understand it, but my heart has come to understand it. So it's like my heart has known about it. So it's like kind of like intuitive. So I can find it, but it's not necessary. I've shared it before. It's in my texts, it's in my books. There are some explanations of what philosophy of history is. So what I can say now is throughout my professional life, I've always spoken spontaneously, and I've never prepared for any topic because I'm very lazy because of my poetic nature. Let's see what will happen. Sometimes I'm sad because sometimes accidentally, or like it happens that you say something systematically and nicely, and sometimes you just jump from topic to topic. So since I've been speaking about these topics for many years, it will be possible perhaps to say things systematically. So history, what does history mean? Let's define our terms, right? Let's start. Hayakawa said, let's define our terms. So we cannot describe terms with terms. You cannot describe words with words. Words are just symbols. They are not the reality itself. So even Alfred Korzybski, as famous semanticist Alfred Korzybski said in a simile in Science and Sanity,
the map is not territory.
The map is not the territory, he says. The map is just a symbol of the territory. It just gives an idea of what the territory is like. If it's a much more detailed map, it gives a little better idea. If it's a small scale, it gives a kind of like roundabout idea. And sometimes, like, there's a map of Turkey on the back of some notebooks, like, small one. And what kind of idea can you get from a small map like that? But, despite this, I've seen some maps by someone. And when I was looking at it, like when I was looking at the historical geography of Anatolia, for example, the maps that I was looking at was much more detailed and, of course, was much more descriptive. So even today, there's like, of course, as you know, there's like Google Maps and AI and computers and internet and so on. So you can see street by street. All the countries, you can see all the countries street by street. So once I had shared like 4,000 pixels, like even to the smallest detail, like satellite pictures, so that you can even see people who are walking on the street. And even so, China is doing it now. It's a country that can limit human liberties. It's like with using cameras, they inspect everyone. They kind of like investigate everyone, recognize where does he work, what does he do, and even to the smallest detail, it can show. There are some maps that can show to the smallest details in our and cameras and satellites and maps, as you know, in our age. And if you increase the scale, it will give more information, of course. But there is not a map that shows fully what's on the map. So when you turn it into like a sphere, doesn't matter if it's a Mercator map or another map. It's always distorting the nature of our sphere, the nature of our Earth, the shape of our Earth. So even if you do it on a sphere, like so you know that there are these spherical atlases, and if you're gonna make an identical one, you have to make a copy of the world, same size, scale. So it's gonna be something is gonna be missing out. So it will give you an idea as much as a map can. So the map is not the territory, right? And so since the map is not the territory, and so is the words are just symbols and signs. So how much does it represent reality? Well, let me tell you, it's very little. For all languages, I'm telling, it's not just for Turkish. Well, Turkish is already destroyed, like ruined. We have ruined it, but. Not that I've talked about it, but it's for all languages, regardless of what language it is. There are some universal notions, some intentional logics, some emotional and value-laden terms. These are all languages are like this, like the nature of language is like this, and all human languages is not even close to a bad, rough sketch of the reality. When we are, giving speech to our words, when we are expressing our thoughts, how much can we express it? Like, what does history mean? So, if you ask our historians, when we look at the historians traditionally, so in my in one of my books, it's like this. How was it like in the medieval ages? How did the historians understand it throughout the ages and so on?
değilim.
I've scribbled about this. You know, I've written some things about this in Humans Adventure on
Kitaplarını da
Earth
unuttum yani.
The
Çoktan
name-
onlara da hiç dönüp
in
bakmıyorum.
that book. So I haven't
Efendim?
revised these books. I've already forgotten all about it. But anyway,
Yani bir kere her tarihçiye göre tarihin
so
manası değişir.
all historians have a different content, understanding of history, right?
Sumaçe'ninki başkadır.
So Sumachen has a different notion, Taberi has a different notion, mine is different, and others are different. So everyone has a different notion. All great historians have a special understanding of history naturally, in and of itself. So just not just a practitioner, not just a practicing historian, but just like just if you're just a practicing historian, something else. But if you're a great historian, then you have your own understanding of what history is. So when I look at history, I think about it with his etymological meaning first, like it comes from verrehe. Verrehe means to see the moon and to make a chronological calendar using the moon calendar. And Arabians also use the moon calendar, as you know. So the Semitic tribes use the moon to define the calendar. So like there used to be a book called History of the Moon. So like a chronological annual. So the documentation made by the government, that there was a book like that. I don't know if it's still published. It's like a 400-500 pages long book. So it like tells what happened in the country in that month. Or for example, there are annuals, right? Britannica has an encyclopedia and also like yearbooks, right? And in 1972, at one point, I looked at the 1972 in the yearbook, and so I thought about like writing a novel or something and so on, but like when I realized that I couldn't write a novel after looking into novel theory, I gave it up. But like because of that, I had looked it up, like 1972 Britannica yearbook, and it's about the same size of the encyclopedia. And when it was when I had just graduated from history and I was a student in 72. It was a story of student of history. I knew about the world. Okay, there was newspapers, books, and all that, radio, not the TVs and internet, not internet, but like there were so many things and I hadn't known about it, and like so many things had happened and I hadn't even heard about it. And when I was looking through that book, I was very surprised to see how many events have happened, and like some you hear about it, like some you never hear about. And in these yearbooks, like so these medieval chronicles are called annales, right? So there's the annales école, right? The school annals, right? And so that is yearly chronicles in the old times, in the medieval times, and so on. And so there's like days history, the moon's history, the month's history, the year's history, the centuries history. It can be spread out through the centuries. In one way, there's like the practice of history. But traditionally, historians, when what they understand is, so writing has been invented, right? In the Sumerians, and since that time there are some written documents, and by judging from these written documents, we can so whether it's a book or some kind of document, some archive document or something else, some kind of like a printed paper or some other kind of remnant, relics, we just look at those things and we try to understand. We try to kind of like imagine and describe what has happened. There's a practice like that, and it's really limited to the written periods. However, I understand it as not just the chronological one, but I understand it as the past times in the widest sense, like past. So whatever has happened in the past is history. So let me just tell you, there's a precaution. Like we just randomly use the words, like all the intellectuals, all the people use the words randomly, right? Haphazardly. And there's like some kind of a, more or less a standard. They use it's kind of like more or less the same, but in science and in philosophy,
Neler oluyor, şu oluyor, bu oluyor.
there are
Başka bir mesele.
terms and
Fakat
so on. It's different, but
mesela
for example,
tarih kelimesi.
the word history or some other word, when we use it,
Şimdi ne dedim ben?
what did I say?
Geçmiş zamanda
Geçmiş
olan
zamanda,
mesela
for
tarih
like I've said, like everything that has
Tarih.
happened in the past, right, as
hakkında
history.
kayıt var veya
So
yok.
whether there's a document about it or not, like
Ne bileyim,
use whatever you
bunu
have,
kullanırsın.
right?
Hangi usul gerekiyor?
Whatever method is necessary, you just try to obtain that information, whatever is accessible, whatever is like whatever exists,
Geçmiş
right?
zamanda kalan da her
And
şey
everything in the past is
İyi de.
history. But
Arkadaş Şahin söyle bakalım bana.
Well,
Geçmiş zaman ne demek?
Şahin, what does past mean? Does past exist? Past, present, and future, is that a correct way of classifying time? What is time even? And
kelimesini tarif edeceğiz.
when we describe past, it's like things that have happened. We were going to describe time. We're going to say like,
Bir de kardeşim bu
yeah,
kelimeleri
but these words then,
peki zaman ne?
what is time then? I will ask you. So like, what is time?
Zamanı tarif edebilen bir filozof
Is
var
there a
mı?
philosopher who can
Öyle
describe what
herkesin
time
kabul
is,
ettiği
like that
öyle bir şey
everyone
yok.
can accept? No, there isn't a
Fizikçiler,
philosopher like that.
nispetinde alanında
Physicists
zaman
and the
tarifleri,
positive
fiziksel
scientists, they
ölçü,
all
zaman tarifi var mı? Yok.
haven't been able to
Çeşitli
come
var
up with
yani.
something
Şimdi
like that's everyone has a
göre
consensus on
geçmiş zamanda
about
bir
what
şey
time
yok.
is. So for some, there's
Gelecek
no
zaman
past
diye bir şey de yok.
and
Mesela
no
Aristo'ya
future.
göre,
For example,
Aristo
Aristotle says, what does Aristotle say?
Aristo der ki,
Aristotle
geçmiş
says
zaman
that
zaten bir
past
şey
is already
kayboldu,
past
yok
and
oldu.
gone, and the
Gelecek
future
zaman
hasn't
gelmedi.
come. So
Şimdiki zamanla
and
geçmişle
the present is
şimdiki zaman, gelecek
in between the
zaman,
past and the
zaman,
future, in just at
olduğuna göre
the
geçmiş
touching
zaman
point.
yok, gelecek
So it's
zaman
if
yok, o
the
zaman
past
şimdiki
and the
zaman yok,
future
o
doesn't
zaman yok.
exist, and then
Anladım,
present
tamam,
doesn't
şimdi
exist
bu
either. So this is
Anladım,
like a
tamam.
logical judgment. It looks like
Tamam,
a sound
yani
judgment,
zamanı
but like
getirmeye getiriyor.
it means that time doesn't
Hatta
exist.
fizikçilerin birçoğu
So
zaten
most
fizikçilerin
physicians,
birçoğu zaman yok,
physicists
zaman bilimi yok.
today,
Birçok
the
şey
contemporary
kabul
physicists say
ediyorlar
like it's an
zaten.
illusion. They consider time as an illusion,
Ruh
like a
bir illüzyondur.
like psyche is an illusion, soul is an illusion, consciousness is an illusion, time is an illusion. Only things that can be experienced, solid matter, can be considered real, and everything else is unreal. There's like this materialistic tendency in
Zaman
physicists.
diye bir şeyden
So
bahsedeceğiz.
when we talk about his time, okay, we talk about past, but what is past? Has it really
Ya
passed?
geçmişte bir zaman geçti.
Or was there a category called like past in the past? Like, or, I mean, so you use these with the
Kullandığımız dilin terkiniyle.
disposition, with the inclination of our language. So if the language that we use in English, sometimes they say there's 8 times, 14 times, whatever. So like so like in English, it's an Indo-European language, and also in Turkish, there's like present, past, future. But in some languages it doesn't exist. So some are like finished and not finished, like perfect, imperfect. In Arabic, some claim it's like that too. There are some linguists that claim it's the same in Arabic. So some Hopi Native Americans, Hopi Indians, doesn't look like the other Indo-European languages. There's a past and the present, but there's no future, right? And for the Arabs, so that they just add se before a word like se and make it past, right? So the languages have different natures.
Bazı dillerde
Some languages,
bilhassa Hint Avrupa
especially for Indo-European languages, present, past, and future is imposed by the nature of the language. But some languages don't have it, don't impose it. I don't remember the name of that guy, the Hopi Indian, the anthropologist who investigated the Hopi Indians. I would like to give you the reference, but I couldn't remember it. But it's not important. It's just a detail of what we're talking about. But what I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about the past, but maybe according to Turkish you can talk about the past. In English you can talk about the past. But if you speak in the Hopi Indian language or another language where it doesn't exist, there are thousands of languages in the world, and they don't have the same logic. They don't. So we think in the same way, in the way that the language imposes on us. So people don't realize that, but Yeah, most logic rules is the classification of the rules of language. So the rules of language the rules of logic come from the language that we use too. So all the events that happened in the past is history according to Şahin like as opposed to other historians. So but you can say like what is past, like is that real? That's another story, that's another philosophical discussion. Let's keep it aside. But this inclination of mine is now a fashion in Europe or something. There's like big history. If you go to Han Academy and so on, you can find courses, like you can write courses like big history, so like the larger history, right? So you will see that the universe, the Earth, it starts with the 13.4 billion, 14 billion years of history they're talking about, and they're like summarizing that. So like the world came into being like this happened, that happened, and then like human history has started in this age and so on. It comes to this age until this age. So it considers history as a whole, and this is a predisposition, it's an inclination that we have in the contemporary times. Why do we have to take it like such a whole, such a large whole? It's another topic of discussion, research topic, but it's like you see something in a context. A word has a meaning in a sentence, and a sentence in a paragraph, and a paragraph in a text, right? So words themselves don't have a lot of meaning. It depends. The meaning depends on the place where it's used, right? In the context. And even Dostoevsky's famous story, I would like to give as an example. There's the alligator. There's a story that Dostoevsky wrote about the alligator, and he's an Orthodox and Slavic Orthodox kind of nationalist person, you know. And after the exile, he's become a strange person, and he's got a ideological person. There are some opponents that he has, rivals like the communists and so on. And in the printing, in the press, there's like some kind of a conflict. Like today in Turkey, like in Dostoevsky's age, there's also like some between the Slavic people and the Western proponents of the Westerners and the leftists and the rightists. There are some conflicts between these people. So he's written about that, as you know. So there are some debates between them in the press, as you know, in the magazines, in the print. And one of the people that he didn't like died, and Dostoevsky published a book called Timsah, the alligator. So like, why are you talking something bad? Why are you writing some bad things like this against a man who has died? And like, so the story goes like this: there's a zoo and there's an alligator, and one of the children come close to the alligator, and the alligator takes him on, and he dies. And then he's like he's left as an excrement, feces out of the alligator. So this man has died and turned into excrement. Is that what you're trying to say? They kind of like said something like that, the rivals of Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky replies, the answer is kind of interesting and illuminating. It goes like this: so you've taken out with a tweezer, you've picked out some of the words like here and there, and you put them in such a way that in the end it turns out that I've written this story as an allegory to insult that man who died, as a kind of satirical story. It seems like you're right, but you present these words in any way, and I'll pick them up from any text, and I'll get any kind of meaning from any kind of text for you. So that's not justified. That's not right. So you just like picking out words. Like there's a context, right? You cannot just pick it out. So you cannot just take it out of the context, right? Take it out of the context. In that case, it can mean something else if you take it out of the context. But events are like this too. So, for example, today we've said, and we are, spontaneously or not. Well, I don't write, etc. Well, I'm old now, but we are conversing here in this context, you know, philosophy of history, time, etc. From one aspect it's important and so on. He's talking about so, and from another it's not important. But in this context, within this context, we're going to say something. But this doesn't explain what's going on in the event. It doesn't. So I've spent a whole lifetime to philosophy of history. I've studied in primary school, like in primary school in the 4th and 5th grade. I used to start. I used to tell all history classes, like narrate all the history classes. So I was always interested in history, and you know, it's like I've always been busy with history and all that. So within this is like an experience that has been gained over a lifetime, and I'm going to try to summarize it in a couple of sentences within the limitations of language, with the capabilities of expression that the language provides. So I'm going to try to express that within those limits. So in history, events don't take place, don't occur alone, and it's like in a geography, it's kind of like there's an atmosphere, there's kind of like the background, a backdrop. So you know, like the 16th century, that something happened, yeah, but like what is the general character of that age?
O devre mahsus tarihi hususiyetleri de naklederseniz,
so if you tell also about the general character of the century, it's hoped that at least this or that aspect of this event can be more completely expressed. It kind of gives it a kind of a whole entirety. It's a very difficult, complicated problem. Holism and individualism. This is the debate of holism and individualism. Science is usually reductionist or individualistic, right? Reductionist. And this South African Iron Smuts, the old guerrilla warrior, and he also fought alongside Churchill. No, fought against. Yeah, so Jan Smuts, who was the president of Iron Smuts, who was the president of South Africa, General Iron Smuts, in 1926 published a book called Holism and Evolution. Holism and Evolution, right? Yeah, in that book, there's a debate that this book has created in the 20th century, and all scientific disciplines were influenced by this, and Toynbee was the secretary of Iron Smuts. So like it was one of the most influential books that I had, he said. So I brought that book, ordered it. I downloaded it, and well, you know, despite although it was hard, like I read it in the computer, like 1,400 books or something. Like you can find it on the internet. Ian Smuts is really a great man, and this holism and individualism discussion kind of like took the center stage in the 20th century. If you're gonna, signify something, if you to see the whole picture, right? So if you're gonna try to express something, you need to explain it in the whole picture. So the pieces are something, and the whole is something else. So if you want to see the whole picture, then the historical event. So there was like the revolution with the Mustafa Kemal and so on. It's like İstiklal Harbi, war. And the First World War, it was the result of the First World War, and in order to understand the İstiklal War, you need to understand the First World War, and in order to understand the First World War, you also need to know the causes that led to the World War I, and it just goes on and until it encompasses the whole history, and it becomes a big history eventually. And leads to that. And there's like in my website there's the academy link, and if you go to the history section, you will see a couple of like exemplars of the discussion of the big history. If for those English speakers.
yeni temayül.
And so there's this new inclination, this disposition towards big history. So there's like Homo sapiens and Homo Deus. There are these famous books by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yahudi yazarın
There's this
yazdığı
Jewish author Yuval Noah Harari.
Harari.
Mhm.
Harari'nin yazdığı kitap da böyledir.
This book is like that too. It's like a big history book. It starts from the anthropological ages and talks about how it came to. So it's like it has got that inclination towards disposition towards big history too. So like those things that I've been talking about is now popular, and it's being done on various. On the internet throughout. Yeah. So to understand big history is possible. Yeah. Okay, that you can say that. But is it possible to learn the entirety of history? You know that it's something else. You can know it, but to what extent? So there are like 1 billion books, the number of books that has been left from history, and there's no one who can learn all of this completely and in its entirety, and it's impossible, right? So let's limit ourselves to Benjamin Lee Whorf. Let's keep ourselves to historical times. Benjamin Lee Whorf.
Antropolog da aslında.
Mhm.
Şimdi bakın, ben bir şey söylüyordum, buna işaretten evvel unuttum. Tam son söylediğim neydi?
So I forgot what I was going to say. Benjamin Lee Whorf. Yeah, okay.
Bütünün geçmişe dair şu an elimizde sayısız kitap olduğunu
we have limitless books about the history, like 1 billion books. So let's suppose that historians. Let's continue that attitude that the historians have, and let's continue with the 5,000 or 6,000 years that the traditionally historians have been considering. So settlements are up to 12,000-13,000, but the period where writing exists, where we have information about, is so because the historian deals with writing. If there is no document, how can the historian know? Like the Forgotten Dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. So these records, to the extent that they can give an idea, we try to get an idea of what history has been like. So these records go back to like 5,000-6,000 years, but there's like the China, India, Far East, and United States, Americas, right? Americas, Africa. So there are countless nations in the world, and there are hundreds of there are thousands of 2,000, 3,000 languages, and everyone has like their own history, and big nations have their long histories, thousands of years in our. So you can also take a national attitude towards history, but if you're going to look at history as the whole of history, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the New Age, the Old Age, etc. In that case, then there will be hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of books. So in no way can you know the entirety of history wholly. Like to see, to read, to get this information is impossible. So no matter what the historian does, no matter how diligent and hardworking they are, they all have to deal with some kind of a summarized information. So there's some information, some knowledge. So this month, this and that happened, and let's summarize it in 500 pages in the moon's calendar or annuals.
Böyle bir şeydir yani tarih.
So something like that. That's what history is like. That's what the historian has to work with. Because
zaten bütün tarihi bilmesi
it's impossible in any way. It's impossible. There's no way that you can know the entirety of history, and no human desire, no human diligence is enough to learn all that from the beginning. Isn't there anything like that, like Wildren's The Story of Civilizations, 11 volumes, 1,000 pages each. So like in 11, so like until the First World War, it's like it summarizes the whole of human history. So a study of history, by Toynbee, for example, 12 volumes. like large volumes. When you look at it, so like this Toynbee knows so much about and Wildren knows so much about the history of the world, but they know what they know, like what they've seen. Generally, like one a historian from a classical methodology of a historian, like looks by judging from the reference books and so on, they learn as much as they can learn. But the historian makes an investigation, for example, a doctorate. Like, what did I look into? I looked into the Arabic excursions into the Anatolia. So, in a certain age, so there was this. So you come across some strange sentence, and this sentence is repeated many times. That's why I remember. So in that age, so like they went into an excursion, a winter excursion in Anatolia, like they were like camping there. So there's like one sentence of information. There's not much information. That's all information that you have. Summary of a summary of a summary. So like he goes from Syria, takes a couple of thousand people, or how many people it is, goes hundreds of kilometers of like it goes a long distance, and throughout the season, throughout the winter, and like 5,000 people have lived something, right? Not just one people. There's not just Abdul Malik. There are thousands of people, and you just know the name of the general, and that they have stayed in Anatolia for one winter, and you just know that much. And there's not much information. If you look at Taberi, Ibn Aziz, whatever, you look at whatever historian you have, get all of them. And that's all that you have. There's not more information about it. Do whatever you want. And most sentences are like that in the Arabic excursions in my doctorate thesis. Like there's no more information. It's like published. So that's why I gave an example. So you make an specific investigation into a specific era, period. And what did I do? So Arabic excursions into Anatolia. So like Islam-Bizans Byzantium conflicts. So like for example, the Hazar Turks and the Armenians also have conflicts with Arabs. But like when you talk about Anatolia, but like what does Anatolia mean? Anatolia is like one of the vassals of Byzantium, and it's like the middle Anatolian. It's not the eastern Anatolia. When we talk about Anatolia today, we imagine today's Anatolia in Turkey, but apart from the Istanbul, European part of Istanbul, it's like Anatolia. No, Anatolia means the place where the sun rises, the eastern provinces, like where the sun rises. It's either in Armenia, in Iran, in other places. But Arabs have came and so I've limited myself to the Byzantine conflicts with the Armenians and the Khazars. Like, well, I've mentioned within necessity to Khazars and the Armenians. But if you expand it a little bit more, you cannot get out of it. It's like it will be too much. So no matter how much you narrow it down, so there are so many things going on in that period of time. So you're gonna look into the Ottoman history. There was one that I didn't like, rest in peace, but he said like, am I Arab, so that I should learn Arabic? So like, if I'm going to study Ottoman history, so Turkish is enough, like, but if you don't know Arabic and Persian, then you will not be able to understand Ottoman. How can you be an Ottoman historian if you don't know Ottoman language? So is it enough to learn Ottoman? Do you need to learn Greek, Venedic, Italian, Bulgarian, this, that, there? You need to know so many languages. So just knowing Ottoman and just looking from the Ottoman sources, and and they don't even learn Ottoman because they think it's Turkish, which is not, and because they don't even want to care to learn about Arabic and Persian, like they're lazy, and they think like, am I an Arab, so that I should learn? But you cannot. They think that you can just read Ottoman by just knowing Turkish, but it's not like that, right? So you need to know Arabic and Persian to
Osmanlı
understand the
tarihiyle
Ottoman.
meşgul olacak.
So
İyi de
even if
Osmanlı
you're going to be
tarihi
busy with engaging in Ottoman history, it's not limited to that. It's not. So there's this, there's that. There's the other nations, other people, the wars, conflicts. If you take everything together, then you need to know a lot of different languages. So you will have to learn a lot of different languages. So 10, 15 languages have been used in my doctoral thesis. Not that I know all of them, but I've consulted some specialists, language specialists. So like some of my friends have helped me with the translations of it.
Meslektaşlardan yardım alarak
by getting the help of my colleagues. So some historians have an attitude like this. So I don't know if it's okay to call them historians, no matter what their ranks, their titles. Some of them are very unqualified. Some of the academicians. Well, okay, let's not gossip. Let's not name them, but. But
Osmanlıcayı bile öğrenmeden Osmanlı tarihçisi olabileceğini zannediyor.
He thinks that he can be a historian without knowing Ottoman, right? So you cannot learn Ottoman without learning Arabic and Persian. So like one of the famous Ottoman historians said, like, am I an Arab? So why should I learn Arabic? So he died, and I don't like gossip, and I haven't named any of them, but it's not important to criticize them. It's not so important to criticize them. But
Şahin hocam. Ama bakın bir yere getirmeye çalışıyorum lafı. Dağılıyor gibi görünüyor da.
It seems like it's it's digression, but I'm trying to get to something. So you try to see it in a whole. You're kind of like
resmin bütününü değerlendireyim falan diye.
To the entirety. You try to develop a big history perspective. And it's 14 billion years, so it's like you can go and check it on the internet. So do we have historical knowledge about 14 billion years? No, astronomical knowledge or scientific knowledge or geological knowledge and so on. And then later they use anthropological or archaeological ones, and then until history, and then when they come to history they use writing, they use of whatever is available. As much as they can know. But that's not possible because it's not even possible even for like even for the last 5,000 years not enough, because there's even millions of books. So what do? Choose a specialty. So, for example, I'm a Selçuklu historian, or an Ottoman historian, or a European history, or American history. You choose a branch, a specialty from history. You narrow it down so that you can handle it. Yeah, okay, but if you narrow it down, there are some specific. You have to get down even more specific, because that's not enough. Like even in the old Islamic history, I take from the Emevi period and the Arabian, the Anatolian excursions, even excluding the Khazars and the Armenians, the Khazar Turks and the Armenians, by excluding them. So like you narrow it down so much. So because if you don't narrow it down, it's so large that you cannot deal with it. And even despite this, first-hand sources, like this is not a source, I don't consider it important, so like I ignored it. And in the bibliography page, I've mentioned them, that they are not important sources. So I'm talking about the the practice of history, right? Historiography. So like traditionally, from what we've seen in the universities and so on, it has been like this, like written ages till now. Everyone chooses a period like Sumerian history, Ottoman history, Selçuklu history, etc. And they choose a period from that. And Halil Nazik, for example, who passed away, just like the foundation and the developmental periods of Ottoman history. So like the rise of Ottoman. So that was his specialty.
son devir.
the rise and the foundation and the rise. So the another one has chosen the Reformation period and so on. So they narrow it down to be able to deal with it. No matter how much you narrow it, there are countless documents, especially in the modern ages. You have countless documents and prints and digital.
Üzerinde
And
ihtilaflar.
there are controversies on all of these, like how should it be interpreted, what is it, what is true, what is not true. There are countless historians with countless controversies, and there's like subjectivity as well in this, so it depends on the historian. So for some, Atatürk was a great man, like indisputably, and some don't like Atatürk, and some people in Turkey don't like Atatürk, for example. For some, Sultan Hamid was a great man. For some, Scarlet Sultan was like was a müstebit, whatever, like bad man and so on. So these are subjective evaluations, but as a result, history is all that has happened in history. That's my definition.
Diğer tarihçilerden farklı olarak big history'ye temayül ediyor yani.
So like I incline towards big
Kontekstin
history.
içinde, varlığın içinde, kainatın içindeki yerimizi,
So like
mevkimizi
to
görelim diye.
see where we are in
Büyük resmin
the
içinde
cosmos.
nereyi işgal ediyoruz? Tamam mı?
Right, where do we find ourselves in this big
Peki
picture?
tarihin felsefesi ne olacak?
kind of
O
place
zaman da
do
o
we
işte geçmiş zamanda olup biten
take?
hadiseler
So what about
hakkındaki
the
yorumlar,
philosophy of
düşünceler,
history?
onun
So like these are
hakkındaki
thoughts
yapıyoruz,
about
değil mi?
the practice of thought
Felsefe
over these
terimdir
events.
zaten bir başlı başına.
Philosophy
Bir
itself,
filozofun felsefeyi
if you
tarif
ask a
edemez.
philosopher to
Tarihi
describe
yazarın
philosophy,
tarihi
they can't.
edemez.
Ask a historian to
Yani
describe
o
history, they
insanın
can't.
yeryüzü macerasında
So
mesela
like in the adventure of humans on Earth, like should we call there was a chapter on that? Should we call it a philosophy? Should we call it a science? Should we call it art? Should we call it history? What is it?
Mesela ilim midir?
Is it a science,
Bilimler gibi.
for example?
Kesinlikle değil.
Of course, like absolutely not. But so with one of the famous historians of ours, I remember like in Yılmaz Öztun's meetings, like I had disputed this issue with one of our famous historians. Like, what kind of connection does history have with science? Isn't well, you know, and this is a very famous historian. So he sees it as a science, for example. So what is this history? Like you're saying, like, okay, well, there are some documents, remnants from history, but
Ben şöyle anlatırım bu meseleyi.
I tell it this in this way that
Tarihten bize kalan bütün o kalıntı
everything that's left, that's been left to us, the documentation and all that, is the well, yeah, it's like there are these archives and all that. This is the scientific aspect of it. There's the material part of it. You can hold it, you can see it, you can measure it, you can count it, you can kind of experience it in so many different ways. You can have some kind of consensus over it. There's something that exists, right? When you talk about the Taberi history, there's like, you know, like there's this Taberi history that you can hold, that you can read, that you can buy. There's a material object that you're talking about.
Bugün var olan şeylerden bahsediyoruz.
We are talking about things that exist today, and events may have, you know, may have been left in the past, but their footprints have been left to us today. So this aspect is scientific. It is possible to measure, you know, like evaluate it with scientific methodology, but interpreting it is, of course, philosophy. So, for example, you can say some stupid things about about people, and you evaluate it, and you kind of like great man or small man or something like that. Some historians have been doing this for ages, but these are some strange interpretations, like he was a great man, he was a small, you know, he was an unimportant man, and so on. So if you interpret it this way or that way, you can interpret it like Toynbee, for example, or Spengler, for example. So there's also that kind of philosophy of history. So you can do it in my way, it's completely different. You can interpret it like Rilke. These are all different interpretations. There's the interpretation aspect of history. Let's interpret it, let's evaluate it. That's philosophy of history. If you think about history over history, okay, you know, philosophizing over history. So thinking about. So this is a bad description, but yeah, this is a description of what philosophy of history is, spontaneously speaking. So, do we really understand what history means? So I say that historical practice is
dokümanları inceleyip araştırıp onlardan hareketle kafamızda bir tasavvur
by
geliştirmemiz
looking at
geçmişte.
these
Demek ki
documents
şöyle
and so
şeyler
on, like,
olmuş
and
ki
making an
böyle şeyler de yazılmış kalmış bugüne falan.
imagination
Veya
of
böyle
it.
izleri var
And
kalmış.
so like there are some
Ve
remnants, there are some
kafamızda
relics, so
tasavvur
we
etmek,
can
canlandırmak
imagine
ve
what's
sonra
happened
bir
in the
bunu
past,
anlatmak.
and then
Tahkiye bir
describing what
yani
it is.
bir
That's a narration.
içinde
It's
de
like a storytelling,
anlatım
right?
sanatı.
It's an
Zaten
art
çoğu
of storytelling.
arkadaşlar için böyle şeyler söylüyorlar da bu
So a lot of
tahkiyeleri
modern
falan da bir
historians
kitabe tarzı.
tell this, that it's a
Ama her
storytelling.
halükarda bir sanattır bu yani. Bir anlatım sanatı, bir tasavvur
It's a
etmek,
narrative art,
canlandırmak,
right? It's like
zihninde hayal etmek
imagining
ve
it,
sonra
describing
anlatmaya
it,
çalışmak, tasavvur
like
etmek ve tasvir etmek.
and
Adı üstünde tasavvur ve
imagine
tasvir yani
and
sanat.
description, right? It's
Romandan hiçbir farkı yok.
pure art.
Tek farkı
There isn't a
romandan
difference between a
gerçeklere
novel and history. The only difference is
belgelerle
that
sınırlıyorsun.
you limit yourself to the
Geçmişten
realities
kalan
and
belgelerin
documents, right?
şehadetiyle
So like
tasavvurunu
by
sınırlıyorsun.
witnessing, like, you know,
Ama
on
bunun
the
dışına
evidence that's
çıkmayan
left from the past,
haller
right?
çok fazladır
But
tarihte yani.
there are many cases where you have to
Tamam.
get out of these boundaries and you have to
Yani
imagine,
hadise burada
right?
bir sanat
Whatever,
tarafı
it's
için
a kind of
tabii.
like an
Sanat
art
tarafı var, bir
aspect
bilim
of this.
tarafı var, bir
So there's
felsefe
like the
tarafı var elbette tabii.
scientific
Ama tarihin
aspect, there's
kendisi
the
kaç.
artistic
kalan
aspect, and
olaylar
so on.
bunlar.
But like, what is history? History is like everything that's been
Bu şu
left
demek.
to us from the past.
Rüyadır ya.
Bir de az da olsa çok da olsa hiçbir şekilde bilinemez bir
There's
anlam
small
var.
or
Çünkü geçmişte kalan
much is like
şeyler yok olup
it
gitmiştir.
cannot be known whether it's a small
Sen ona
scale or
şahit
large
olamazsın.
scale. So like small
Oradan
event or
kalan
big event.
bilgilere,
I mean,
belgelere, dokümanlara,
large period or a
neyse,
short period.
arşive
It's
veya
all
işte
so.
Sikkeli, Süleymaniye mabedi,
Some remnants, some Solomon's temple, some coins, and so on, whatever. So whatever is passes through the sieve of history, and you look at all the documents and remnants, and you try to imagine. It's a very, very, you know, insufficient, small summary of the summary, right? Whatever it is, it's just like you imagine it, and you try to describe and narrate it. So this happened and that happened based on these, according to these documents.
Güzel ama
Okay, fine, but
şimdi bu alanı daralttığın zaman
when
bile,
you narrow
çok
it
fazla
down,
daralttığın zaman bile,
even if you
yani
narrow
başa
it down
çıkabilmek.
extremely to be able to
O
handle
zaman
it,
da bakıyorsun ki o alan üzerine fikir,
even then you
onların fikirleri
see
veya
that the
belgeleri
specialists
birbirini
that
tutmuyor kardeşim.
think about that specialty have controversies, like they have controversial views. So like, yeah, okay, well, let's take a look at my doctorate thesis, like urban excursions. Like there's Ostrogorsky, who translated the Byzantine history. So I've used the English version of it. It wasn't available when I was doing my doctorate thesis. So it was a nice translation, large book.
Oradan mesela
So, for example, Ostrogorsky, when you read it from Ostrogorsky, and it's one of the most famous Byzantine specialists. According to Ostrogorsky,
Emevi devri boyunca
throughout the Emevi period, from Ömer to Emevis,
İstanbul iki kere kuşatılmış.
Istanbul has been invaded twice by the Arabs.
Bir de Strange vardır. Halifelerin toprakları diye bir İngilizce kitap
There's
var.
a man who's like the Halifs, the soils of the Halifs, right? The lands of the Halifs says that it's been invaded four times, and Şahin says it's been invaded 3 times. So yeah, we use the same documents, but so we narrow it down so much that it's not possible that the other person hasn't seen the documents that I have seen, because it's like.
Neydi o Alman tarihçinin adı?
What was the there's a German historian, Wellhausen. He has also seen those documents because it's a very limited area. So all the things that I knew, he must also be aware, right? The remarkable ones, if not all.
O da haberdar aşağı yukarı. Ben de peki nasıl oluyor bu?
So how come there's such a big difference? So this is history, right? One says it's been invaded 3 times in Istanbul, right? If you accept Chinese interpretation as an authority, it's been 3 times. And I might have published it in Istanbul invasion, sieges of Istanbul. And according to a British historian, it's been 4 times, and according to Ostrogorsky, it's been twice. So how is this possible? Of course, there must be a kind of an explanation for this. So Ostrogorsky
birinci ve ikinci
the first and the second
İstanbul
one, according to
muhasırlarının
me,
birbirinin devamı
are
sürüyor.
the
7 sene
continuation
boyunca
of
sürmüş.
each other. It's like
kuşatma
it's a
sayıyor.
7-year-old
Donanması
long.
gelmiş,
So the
Muhammed
Arabian
Aleyhisselam
fleet has come
İstanbul'u
and
kuşatmış.
invaded,
Sonra kış gelince
like
şeye çekilmiş.
sieged
O Domates'in
Byzantine.
alanda keşfedildi.
And when the
Ama
winter has
Arap
come,
donanması çok da başarılı olamıyor.
so like
Bizans'a
the
karşı.
Arabian
Uzaktan
fleet is not so
astronomlarla atıp böyle yakıyorlar
powerful,
gemileri.
and because the
Böyle bir
Byzantines
silah
can
keşfetmişler.
use
Tarihin ilk
some
ateşli silahıdır.
fire
Üstelik top mermisi,
weapons,
sifanofor
some kind of
dediğine
like a
göre borularla
siphanophore, some kind of like a
baruta
flamethrower,
değil de işte greyfo ateşini
some kind of a
atıyor
flamethrower
uzaktan
they use like
gemilere.
from a long
Deniz
distance,
tutuyor, gemiler de
and
yanıyor tabii. yanıyor
the sea kind of, and then there's a kind of barrage of fire, and all the ships
Formülü
burn
mamülde
and
belli
so on,
şimdi artık.
and the formulas are all
Bunlar da başa
known
çıkamadıkları
today.
için
And
kışları
since they
bizim
can't
Kapıdağ
deal with it,
Yarımadası'ndaki
and
Erdek'te
they
donanma
stay in Erdek,
kışlıyormuş
so
Arap donanması.
they stay in Erdek,
Baharın
the
gelmesini
fleet,
bekliyormuş
and
tekrar
waits
hücuma.
for the spring to
Böyle
come to
uzunca bir
fight back.
zaman sürünce işte
So
7
when
yıllık
it
bir
lasts
kuşatma
for
o
such a long
Erdek'teki
time, it's like the
kuşatma
7-year-old, and the winter camping is also like counted as one. So instead of 3, it's 2. And the other one, where does he get the fourth one? So he says this, but Sebeos, Finike in Anatolia, there was like this conflict, and there's a continuation of that, and so on. And the Sebeos's narratives is like considers it as an Istanbul.
If you look at it that way, if you count it like that, it will be 4. If you count it the other way, it will be 3 or 2. But there are controversies, and I don't accept it. The other one or perhaps the other one doesn't accept it. And if he accepts it, I don't accept it. He says there are 4. The other one says 2. I say 3. So there are such strange conclusions and misunderstandings between experts, right? If you go deep into the details. But as a result, history, what we call history, is things that have happened in the past and the interpretations of it. And these interpretations are primitive, even among the great philosophers of history, such that I'm a very skeptical philosopher, and to history and philosophy of history, I have made some radical criticisms and attitude like that. So historians are not usually engaged in philosophy of history, the classical historians, or they don't know about it. They don't know much about it, or they're not interested. So they do history. They don't care about the history aspect of it, and they make a lot of and sometimes childish and foolish. Like Kızıl Sultan, Hakan, or some other Arabs, and this or that. They make a lot of comments, judgments, some strange judgments. Turks are like this, Turks are like that. Some strange. No, I don't remember. To give an example, but these are childish and foolish comments that I can only consider funny, comic, ridiculous. It's not interpretations are not information. Something has happened, and it's a fact, right? If you add interpretations, value interpretations, it's an interpretation. Value judgments, then it's an interpretation, and interpretations are a kind of philosophy, even if it's at the lowest level. So they say that we don't engage in philosophy of history, but they do it very often. But to call it philosophy of history is to characterize it very much. But all in all, they are making interpretations of history, philosophy of history, because it's not possible to do it otherwise. So there is this problem like this too. Let's do pure history, let's not get into the philosophy of history. If we don't like it, okay, well, I don't like it either, but we can't make pure history. And so the least is like we have to make some interpretations. There's another way. Can we elaborate on this?
Okay, you said that you're not gonna do philosophy history, but when you try to approach these historical events, the documents and all that, historians are not aware of this, but some of them are aware, some of them are not aware, or some of them are aware to some extent. There's a worldview, and you look at the history with that worldview.
Efendim? Yani bugünlerde
These days, in Turkey, in universities,
bana göre pozitivist ve materyalist
there's a materialist or positivist understanding of the world.
Bu aslında 1800'lü yıllarda
This
Alman Leopold von Ranke'nin
actually
dayalı tarihçilik
is based on Leopold von Ranke's
fikirlerine dayanıyordu.
documentarialistic understanding of history.
Bu fikirleri.
Edward Karen tells about these and talks about these topics in his book What's History.
Zaten 18. yüzyılda başladı o anlamda ciddi tarihçilik ve
So serious historiography started in that time, and then there's like the Ranke's influence. There's like this documentarist. So if there's a document, it's correct, and so kind of like a positivist inclination methodology.
Var yani çoğunlukla.
Mostly in Turkey. There's such an understanding. In the modern world, this has changed. There are criticisms and books, but our historians don't follow those so much. They are most interested in their own field of expertise. They don't look at these kind of things, and maybe that's why they're not aware of it. But there are such discussions. However, there's a document, positivism in Turkey. The fact that it's done like this in Turkey, and there's a historical understanding. You have an understanding of history, and an understanding of history means that there's a philosophy of history. You have traditionally, or from your teachers, or from your practice, from your method lessons, or somehow you get it. Either consciously or unconsciously. Nevertheless, there's a worldview. There's a kind of like there's a perspective that you have on history, and they assume that this is kind of like accepted throughout the histories. And some historians are so naive that they assume that everyone has the same kind of notion of history, and tarih is like the history is a discipline like this. And as a result, everyone must think in the same way as I do, otherwise they are thinking wrong. They think they have an understanding like that. So they have an assumption like that. There's a document, but the document doesn't evidence anything. It doesn't prove anything. So you can say, yes, Fatih Sultan Mehmet, you can say Fatih Sultan Mehmet, Fatih Ebul Feth, there's a book called Tarih Ebul Feth, and this book has been published, you can say. Kıvami's Tarih Ebul Feth. So there are these books with Ottoman originals, and the National Education, Ministry of Education has published it, and Dursun Bey's history, or some other histories. So there are books like this. Yes, there is a book like that. There's a document like that, and this man says this in here. And there's a document. There's in the archives. There's a decree. There's an edict. It proves that this exists, but it doesn't prove that this event has taken place. Carol has explained it very well in What is History. Let me tell you from what I remember. That event just describes what those people think about what happened, not what the event was like. That person has written it down, but that's how he sees the event. It doesn't mean that the event has taken place in that way, or he has found it appropriate to put it that way, or it was his understanding. So it's in his consciousness, in his mind. So that's his impressions about what the event was like. Thucydides' history tells you about what Thucydides thinks about the events, but are the events like that indeed? No. So you cannot say this has happened. This is just the impression of the historian in his mind. So yeah, okay. Well, let's repeat. So, like for example, there's a sentence, famous sentence in this Abdülmelik, who has camped in a winter camp in Anatolia. Yes, okay, there's this information, but like, yes, yeah, but Taberi says so. I mean, like, so can you say that this has happened? You must say, according to Taberi, not that this has happened, but there's an information like this that Taberi gives us. It may be true or it may be wrong, and in large proportion it's mostly distorted. So because of the nature of human affairs, it's mostly distorted, and it's also not possible to describe things in words, and the reality itself is something and its description is something else. So I'm speaking, for example, you see me, you see my mimics, you see my tone of voice, my gest, my mimics, etc., right? All of my explanations. Like there's this video record that as we are living it, but if you instead of this, so like you read it from one of the texts, you will see that it doesn't look like this. The writing is different, the style of writing is different, the things that you can write is different, and the speaking is different. The nature of speaking and the nature of writing is different. So linguistics know about this, that dialogue is a problematic communication method. So we are now in a dialogue, right? Like I'm speaking, you're you're not even, you don't even, and you don't even dare to ask questions. So it's a monologue, not a dialogue, but yeah.
Şimdi ben konuşuyorum, güzel.
Yeah,
Güzel de
Hocam çok geriye gitmeyin, ses gidiyor.
O zaman bunu çekeyim. Ben bu konuşma
so
esnasında
during my speech,
düşüncemin akışına göre
according to the flow of my thoughts, I give examples that come to my mind, and it takes the conversation to a certain current, a certain direction. So not like, you know, not finding some good examples, thinking about it in all different ways, like in writing. Okay, so here's, like I just remember, so Tolstoy said, for example, historians answer questions are like deaf men who answer questions that nobody has asked. So you say something, he gives you an answer, but you haven't asked a question like that. So why are you telling a question, like why are you saying things like this, like where are you? So these historians are like deaf men. So he makes fun of them in that way. So yeah, it's fine, it's a nice example. Great.
Tamam ama yani siz bu tarihçi olarak bir şeyler
so as a historian you tell something, you narrate something, but
gelen örnekten hareketle
you judge from the experience that you judge from the examples that you have in your mind. You don't have the opportunity to revisit it, re-edit it, and review it, and so on. Like it's writing is a different format, right? But it's another thing to do it spontaneously when you're speaking, right? So this can happen in writing as well, like the associations and the flow of the words, right? So like this stream of conscious or whatever. This philosophy of history has taken us in this direction. So if you're speaking spontaneously, you remember something, you forget about something. So for example, like you know, you remember about something, and for example, everyone has a notion of philosophy of history. Everyone, well, even though they may not be aware of it, is a philosopher of history. If they understand philosopher of history in the way that I understand, and how do I understand it? It's a general worldview about the existence and universe. So it also, of course, it takes history as its base and takes everything into consideration. And everyone has, even laymen have some kind of a notion of what the world is like. You know, they all have some worldviews. So, for example, in Turkey, people don't trust each other because people consider each other unreliable. Yes, in our people have become really unreliable and kind of like dishonest. So yeah, it's like he has a notion about in his mind, and he treats like that. So it's not important.
Yani
It's not important how much history they know. So, for example, how much they know about the Prophet Muhammad's life, for example. You may have heard about a couple of things from here, from there, from the TV, from the press, and that's all. Well, and what about the people who've been educated? They're just like the history books that they know from school that they've been taught. And how much does the historians know? Nobody knows history. It's impossible to know history. I'm saying something else. What I said is that the history itself and the events can never be known in any way. So it's like divine consciousness can understand it only. So we don't know what happened in history. Yes, Fatih has conquered Istanbul. Yes, we know about that. Yeah, there's like we know indubitably that there has been something like that.
Mantıklı insan olarak. İşte yaklaşık olarak 1453 yılında takvim ihtilaflarını görmezden gelerek miladi takvime göre 1453
like in 1543 in AD
bu kadar elbette biliyor.
he has conquered Istanbul. Yes, that much is known. But how did this happen? That's another story.
Yaşadığı şimdi
so I just say one sentence, but it hasn't happened in one day. This siege has happened in a couple of months, right? 29th of May. So there are some debates and so on. So there was like the preparations for it, and before like the Rumeli fortress has been made to prevent. So like they made it in a short amount of time. It's like a huge success. They talk about it, and art historians talk about it. It's not important, but
yani bir sürü hazırlığı var,
there's a lot of preparation. That it hasn't happened in one day, so that it can. I mean, it's not something that you can say in one word, one sentence. Yes, there's a lot of detail. Yeah, okay, fine. But these are all summarized. These are all summaries, right? Let alone.
Mesela. Yazar mısın?
So for example, look. Harari, for example, has written about the world history, right?
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells.
Ve bilim kurgu yazarı İngiliz.
H.G. Wells, for example.
Gazeteci adam ha. Tarihçi bile değil.
Yes, it's like a newspaper, like journalist, right? He's a science fiction author, like, but he wrote a history of the world, and people have, so they needed a general worldview, and people needed that, and he wrote about it, and people liked it. So, a story of philosophy, Will Grant has written about it, and he talks about it in the beginning of that book. So like, so there's a man called Wells, and he writes a history of the world, in one volume, and in Chicago, William McDowell has written
The Rise of the West.
The Rise of the West, right? The Rise of the West. One volume of world history. 600, 700 pages long, with pictures and all. Nicely selected. So there's very nice books and a very good narration, and I know that the Turkish translation is horrible. It's been translated. It must be. It has been horrible, and I have never liked any of the translations, and some turn it into absurdities. I can give examples, but that's another topic. Let's not get into that. I don't know how the translation was, but so like the best world history in one volume, Toynbee says about that book, William McDowell's. So The Rise of the West. It's a very good book, and I liked it.
Bazı tarihçiler gibi.
So he speaks very logically, unlike some historians. Unlike some.
Meselesi. Mesela bir duran.
For example, Will Durant
12 cilt medeniyet tarihi yazmış. Bu
has written
tarihin tamamını bildiği anlamına gelir.
11 volumes of the story of civilization, but doesn't mean that he knows
yazmış mı? Yazmış.
All of history. Yeah, he started from the beginning and he's written about it, right? Yeah. It's a great narrative, it's a great richness and style. You cannot see such things in other like historians. Toynbee's a study of history, for example. Gibbon's history of Rome and so on. There are some general histories like that take a large period of time, or the whole world history.
mülük yani milletlerin ve hükümdarların tarihi anlamında yazmış zaten kitabında da öyle. Yani genel tarih.
So there are like some general histories.
Okumaya doyamazsınız yani o kadar tatlıdır. Tamamını okuyamadım da kulaklıkla dinledim yani telefona kaydet.
So I didn't read it all, but I've listened to it. But it's like really enjoyable.
Eğer bir adam kalkar. Dünya tarihi hakkında bilinmesi gereken her şeyin tamamı
There's like
Grant'ın bu kitabında vardır.
if you say everything that you need to know about the history of the world is contained in this book, it would be stupid, right?
De tartışılabilir ama. Ne yapacağız daha fazla teferruat birlikte? Yani tarih uzmanı mı olacağız? Çok mu lazım tarih uzmanı olmak? Bir insan için tarih uzmanı olsun? Ne yapacağız?
So why should be a history expert in history? Why should you need so much?
Yani başlangıçta zevkli çocuk.
So it's like very interesting when you're beginning and so on, like you're out of curiosity and so on. So you read Ibn Haldun and so on, try to get a meaning out of it, and there are some problems with the connection. I'm reconnecting now. Translator speaking.
Meydan muharebesi.
So there's a
İşte 1600 yıllardan ne zamansa. Sengotar Meydan Muharebesi diye askeri tarih neşridir zannederim. Bir kitapta gördüm ben bunu.
so I saw this kind of book about warfield.
Çünkü ben Osmanlı tarihi uzmanı değilim. Ben İslam tarihi.
So I looked at it and I wasn't interested in it because I'm not in Ottoman history. Why should I care about what happened in 16th century with some Sengotar conflict in some battlefield? So it's a detail of the Ottoman history of if you're interested in that period of Ottoman history. Why should I care about it as if I'm not an Ottoman historian, right? So at one time, Yılmaz Arslan told me
bilmem hangi paşanın falan
there's a
kitap bilmiyorum o mecliste bulunan arkadaşlar da şahit bu.
Showed me a book by some pasha, and the other people who were present in that meeting also saw it, witnessed it.
Tarihi işte Osmanlı.
So the Ottoman history by some pasha is I recommend it's a very important. Yeah, and I said like, why should I read it? I'm not an Ottoman historian.
Ya dedim ben niçin okuyayım Osmanlı tarihiyle ilgili bir kıymetli bir eseri?
So why should I read a valuable work about Ottoman history? I'm not I'm not an Ottoman historian. I'm an Islam historian, right? Like history of Islam. And I just like, well, it's just my doctorate thesis was about that, right? My specialty was about that. Not that I'm interested in that to a great extent.
Osmanlı tarihi yani okuyacağım ben öyle bir kitabı. Falan tarihten olmuş. Bana ne? Ne olmuş?
So something has happened in that period. Yeah, okay, so what, like, you know, it's hundreds of years ago, and it's like no idea if it has any kind of effect on today's events. It's like
bu kadar geniş kültürün
so you have such, yeah, you can, if you want, you can also be a specialist in Ottoman. You have such a great knowledge.
Osmanlı tarihiyle ilgilenirsem Osmanlı tarihi uzmanı olurum. Bir kadar emek verirsem, onun kadar vesikaları incelersem.
If I have a lot of information about history and so on. If I can be, if I investigate a little bit, I will also learn about it. But like, why would I want to be a historian of Ottoman history? So see how different it is, right? These perspectives. So but it's they care a lot about history, especially about their national history.
neyse yani.
Ottoman and Turkish
Milli
history.
tarihimiz önemli.
So our
Çünkü
national
neden
history is
o
important
milli
because
kimlik
it's like
meselesi,
there's a kind of
meselesi,
national
meselesi,
identity,
meselesi,
cultural,
meselesi,
national identity,
başka
nationalism,
ideolojik
and so on. Some
angajmanlar diyor.
ideological
Ama
engagements in the
Osmanlı
background,
tarihini bilmek lazım.
and
bilmek
they
lazım.
think that they need to know Ottoman history. Why should we know about it? Why? What's the purpose of it?
Ama eğer şayet bir
But if you are gonna be if you are a Turkish nationalist and you're conservative, so for you it's very very important. But that's a different thing. That's because of your worldview, right?
Osmanlı tarihiyle Aztek tarihi
So
arasında
like
hiçbir
there's
fark
no
görmüyorum.
difference between Ottoman history and Aztec history. That's about people and that's about people too.
Biri benim mensup olduğum kültüre.
One is about the culture that I'm a member of, so that's why it's like more important to you, perhaps. Like you can identify with it
Şayet o
to some
kadar
extent.
emek veriyorsan,
But like if you're going to be an expert, so you can also be an expert if you spend as much time in that discipline.
İyi de niçin olacak?
But why?
Yazardan numaraların sualine geliyorum gene.
So I'm going to come to
Burada sormuş herkes kendi
Professor Newman's question.
Yani
So like-
insanların bir fikri var tarih
So
hakkında.
everyone has got an idea about history.
Diyor ki efendim Peygamberimiz mesela şöyle şöyle şeyler yaşamış. Anlatıyorlar
So
ya.
our
Halbuki aslında ben size söyleyeyim. Mülk ve İlafet diye bir konferansım vardı. Biz peygamberin hayatı hakkında hemen hemen hiçbir şey bilmeyiz. Sadece Kur'an'da
we know anything
yazılı
about the life
birkaç
of
ayette geçmiştir. Kur'an'da
Prophet
birkaç
Muhammad.
ayette peygamberin
and
şahsi
so
hayatına ait
just the
birkaç
personal
ayet
life of
var.
Prophet Muhammad is
Bu
mentioned a
harflerle
couple of times in the
ilgili.
Quran. That's all.
Ama hepsi ondan
About the
ibaret.
wars and so
Geri
on.
kalan her şey
That's all, and all the rest
Peygamberin
is
şeyi sonra teşekkür
has been
eden hadis-i kerim veya tarihi
hadis
rivayetlerinden
and
ibaret.
like
Yani
the
peygamberin zamanıyla alakası yok.
so like
Çağdaş
it's
belge
like
yoktur. Kaldı ki
there's no
belgeleri
contemporary
devlet
document.
ilgili belge
As
zaten
I've mentioned,
belgeyi
documents are not so important either.
anlayışını
It
yansıtır.
just
Gerçeği değil.
represents the views of the
Gerçekten
person who's
olduğunu
written that
sanırım.
document. What has
O
happened
belge
in
oradan
reality
kalan
is
bir
known
iz,
only by
bir
God.
intiba.
So it's just a trace.
Ama
It's just
bakın.
it just gives us an impression.
Hadisenin bir diğer yönü var.
So and then there's another side of the
Biz hukukta
story
iki
of the
şahitle
story.
adam asıyoruz ya.
So we in law the two witnesses are enough to kill people, right? Like execute someone in law. So like there are two people, and there was a movie, the Shawshank Redemption, right? And they've put him in prison for 30 years on execution to be executed for murder, right? And he hadn't committed murder because of the, well, we know that we as the spectator know about it because of the nature of the movie, right? Like because it shows us. But they found her later. They found her later, and they put her in prison. Like, but that yeah. There are witnesses, there are evidences, there are some documents.
Şimdi ben daha teferruatlı örnekler de vermek istemiyorum.
I don't want to give some more detailed examples.
Bence efendim belgelerin, bu elimizdeki delillerin, işte geçmişten kalan izlerin şehadetiyle böyle bir şey tasavvur ediyoruz. Demek ki böyle bir şey olmuş ki bunlar da kalmış falan diyor. Bu bazen kesin değilse de oldukça yaklaşık intiba verebilir. Bu bir durantı söz ama bu tarih, medeniyet tarihi, sosyoloji, tercüme de tarih üzerine notlar diye veya tarih
Children's, yeah, there's lessons of history. Like there, it has been translated as well. Like it says there that history, most of history is guessing, and the rest is prejudice.
Muazzam bir tecrübeyle
So
söylüyor.
he tells about it with a great experience. This smart, like this intelligent man, like, and I care about his views and so on, like Wildrens, right? He's not like the other historians.
Tarihin
His experience is reliable. So most of it is guessing. So we look at the documents and we guess. Probably it's been like this. So we imagine it, and the rest is prejudice. These prejudices are
sıradan tarihçilerin işi ya.
for the ordinary historians.
Tarih filozoflarında yok.
Are there not great historians, philosophers of history among ordinary historians? So Toynbee is accused of turning history according to like some ideology of the Anglican Church, like some kind of theology. Some accuse him of that.
Bakın bir örnek vereceğim.
Let me give you an example.
Ha örnek vermeyeyim. Şunu da söyleyeyim bu arada.
So,
tamamlamış olayım.
let me
Belki çok
tell-
böyle geçeceğim artık utandım. Tarih felsefesi bahseder. Çok uzak.
Program bitti zaten hocam.
Şimdi bakın. Peki tarihçiler hakkında böyle konuştuk da peki
So we
bu
talk
tarih
about historians in
filozofları
this
vallahi
way, but
oturuyorlar
like
geniş
these
genelleme
philosophers of
yapıyorlar.
history make
Tarih
some
var,
generalizations like
ellerindeki bilginin
based
son
on
derece
their
sınırlı olduğunu
information,
sanki farkında değil mi?
as if they don't know
Böyle değil,
the
Sümer tarihi
knowledge
hakkında
that they
veya
have,
Medeniyet tarihi
information that they
hakkında veya
have
İslam
is
tarihi
very
hakkında
limited.
bu
So
tarih
what can
hakkında
Toynbee
bilirken o elindeki gördüğü bilgilerle
so
bilgisinin
like
sınırlı olduğunu farkında değil mi?
don't realize that
İnsanlar böyle tuhaf bir
he's
yaratık
limited
yani.
by
Cesur bir
the
yaratık.
information
Kendi
that he
kafasında
has
bir
about,
tarih
for
inşa
example, when he's talking about the
Şimdi bakın,
history of Islam or this or that.
Theories of History kitabında
So
tarih teorileri
theories of
kitabında
history in that book,
Can we know the pattern of the past?
can we know the pattern of the past?
Geçmişin
Can
paternini
we?
bilebilir miyiz? BBC televizyonunda
BBC
yapılmış
has
Toynbee ve Peter Gale diye bir Hollandalı tarihçi arasında
Toynbee and Peter Gale
metni vardır.
talks about an interview. There's a text of an interview, right? So can we know the pattern of history, right?
Evet.
Çok güzel bir tartışma BBC'de yapılmış. Şimdi orada Peter Gale'in
In
söylediği
BBC, there's like great debate. There's a text of it. So like virtual, I had a newspaper article called "The Virtual Civilization," and I've cited this in that article.
İkna edici bir
So it's a
intibah
very kind of like convincing, maybe impression. Yes, this book has got a lot of like, you know, a lot about history. Maybe it has left a great impression. It may seem very convincing,
falan gibi teorileriniz falan.
your theories and so on.
Mesela
But
20 tane
for example, there are 21 civilizations. You're talking about like, so like if you talk about like, you know, maybe 27, not 200 civilizations. You're talking about 27 civilizations. Why not 3? Why not 1?
Veya 2000
Why
tane
not
değil.
2000?
Bırak ne kardeşim hiç
Like,
medeniyet. Sen kendi kafana göre bir
You
medeniyet tarifi
talk
yap.
about you make a definition of a civilization, and based on that civilization, and you choose some events, and according to your understanding of civilization, you will choose 21 civilizations. There are 2,500 languages, so languages are a different thing. So when you Germans don't like the word civilization, they prefer culture. So Spengler says there are 8 cultures. He doesn't even mention any civilization. There are, in the world history, there are 8 of them. So the decline of the West. There's a bad translation of it in Turkish if you want it.
Böyle 8 tane.
So there are 8.
Kardeşim neye göre yani?
So why 8 cultures?
200 tane değil.
Why not 200? Why not 1? Why not 5?
Bu rakam nereden çıktı?
So where
Senin
did this
kafandan
number
çıktı yani. Senin
come out from? Your understanding, from your mind, right? So you have an understanding like that. You see it this way, and you see, well, you look at it this way, and you see it this way. And an ordinary person, the layman, has a view as well. The layman,
Hatta Türkiye'de ben tarihçilerin bile bilemeyeceğini iddia ederken
even I say that even historians, even specialists cannot know about it because there is no data document about it. So there are many people who think that they know about the life of Prophet Muhammad, even among the ordinary Muslims, right? So the the people who live with him and so on. There's a huge library about it. Like there's a huge, I mean, writing. There's a lot of writing about it, but they make these generalizations, but they just don't know that they're like abusing these interpretations. These
düşünce sistematikleri olduğunu eski tarih felsefesini iddia etmiştir birçok insan. O yüzden tarih felsefesini sevmez de.
So a lot of people have claimed that these are large generalizations, like, you know, free generalizations and so on. So there's Hegel, he's a philosopher, and he also has a book on philosophy of history. And the most popular and the worst, for me it's the worst and the most stupid one.
Ama en popüler, en fazla tesir eden. İyi mi? Yani işte burada arkadaşlar soruyor şimdi meydan okuma ve tepki teorisi hakkında tamam makul, güzel, mantıklı söz.
So there's like a challenge and reaction theory of Arnold Toynbee. What do you think about that? Like, okay, let's explain it. It seems to explain it, but like, can we claim that it explains everything?
Ben böyle iddialara karşı
So
çok aşırı şüpheyle karşılaşıyorum.
I'm very skeptical towards such claims. Yes, I've read it. I've selected history. I've chosen history under the influence of Ibn Haldun and so on.
Tamam, değerli adamlar, büyük adamlar.
Yeah, they are
Bunlar
great
adamlar,
men, they are big men,
farklıdır.
and
Evet.
Bunlar benim üstadlarım, insanlar için değer verdiğim insanlar. İnsanlığın tamamına değer vermem ben.
it's
Sadece
like
büyük adamlara
I
değer
value
veririm
only the big
zaten.
men, not
Tamamıyla öyle.
not
Bunlar da büyük
all
adamlar
humanity, but just
kategorisinde
great
geçiyor.
men.
Yani
And these are in the category of
Ama
great
büyük
men.
adam
I'm
değil.
not saying it to say that
Ben
they're
söylediğim
not
benim seyircilerimde
not
böyle bir şey de
important,
yok. Otoritesinde
but just it doesn't mean that just because it's a great man that I have to accept everything that he has to say. So, for example, Plato is one of my masters. Is one of the people that I like, but I cannot say that everything that he has said is correct or
O
true.
sadece semantik bir kavramın
Or just
çerçevesinde
because,
kalıyor, felsefe
like-
gerçeklikle temas edemiyor, tenkidi evladını da kaplar.
So
Aristo'yu da
it
kaplar.
includes Aristotle and Plato and everyone.
Tenkittir.
So it's like
Yapılmış. Ama bir gerçekliği var o tenkidin, yani müsaadenizle. Demek istediğim,
so. What I'm trying to say is that
belki diğer tarih filozofları da haklı. Diğer tarihçiler de veya diğer münevverler, filozoflar da haklı. Ama felsefeciler içinden gelip de felsefe yapan tarih filozoflar da var. Voltaire mesela bu işin kurucularından.
so. There are also
Yeah.
like among the historians, there are also like philosophers like Voltaire, for example, or Spengler and Weber and so on.
Pareto'yu, Weber'i belki bir ölçüde
Mhm.
sayabilir. Yani bu var. Bunlar bu mesela Osman Spengler'in kültürler
Also,
hakkındaki
Spengler-
nazarları bir organizmaya benzetmesi.
So
veya
like
bir-
also Spengler makes it look like an organism and so on. Like these are debatable. These are like these can be discussed, but these are not such firm thoughts that as they are assumed to. How is my philosophy of history? That's a different topic. So
Hocam,
the evaluation of what history and
Hocam
history,
aslında biraz
philosophy
o
of history is.
girişle sona ermiş oldu.
Tabii,
Öteden
yine de size söyleyeyim, çok uzattım lafı irticalen konuştuğum için, böyle
Estağfurullah.
net temiz bir tarifinde yapmamış oldum yani tarih felsefesini
So I
yapanlar.
haven't been able to
geçmiş
make a
zamandaki
clear
hadiselerin
definition of it.
muhasebesi ve onun hakkındaki yorumlar demek tarih
So like
felsefesi. Tamam ama
philosophy of history is
ister
an
tarih
evaluation
filozofları
of the
yapsın,
events in the
ister
history.
tarihçiler yapsın, isterse
Whether it's
sıradan insan,
historians or
kendi
laymen
yaptığı
or
yorumları
philosophers
yapsın.
of history
Öyle
do it
insanları
according to their
zannettiği
own
kadar
worldview.
esaslı fikri spekülasyonlar değil bunlar.
These are
İlmi
not
bakımdan zaten fazla
sound
yeterlilikleri
speculations.
yok.
They don't have
Felsefi bakımdan da
scientific
fazla sistematik,
reliability or validity.
Dayanıklı.
And from the perspective of philosophy, it's not philosophically unchallengeable, or whether it's like
sınırlılığı ve kısıtlılığından
not.
hem malumatın sınırlılığı
Tarih
ve
zaten öyle.
kısıtlılığından
so.
Tarih
hem de tarihçinin sınırlılığından bahsediyoruz.
So you mentioned the limitations of the historian, of knowledge, of history. So you're saying that there's no way to make a claim on verity, on the claim on truthfulness of something or to actuality of something.
Hadisimiz de çok önemli olduğu için biraz da hocam sizin insicamınızla
So-
konuşmaya başladıktan sonra dış erkenlere karşı çok korunaklı olduğunu söylemek istiyorum.
I must say that your continuation is very
bir iddiayı ifade etmiş olsanız da
insurmountable. Like your continuation, is like very armored towards external factors, and even though you may say that we are not brave enough to dare to ask a question, so yeah, I negate some questions to
Hocam
not lose a train of
şöyle
thought.
bir şey
Yes,
söyleyeyim. Ben şüphesiz alan, konu, mevzu çok geniş. Yani
so
çok fazla şey,
it's a
çok
large
fazla zamana,
field, very large
ihtiyaç
topic. It requires a
hissettiğimiz bir
lot
mevzu.
of it requires a lot of time.
Söyleyeyim not olarak dinleyicilerimize.
So I must say this as a note to to our viewers.
Konferansımın videosu var sistemde.
Tabii.
I have like
10 tane yaptım.
there are many
Tabii.
videos on my
7 tane yaptım. Onlar da
website
daha geniş
about the
bir
philosophy of
şerafı
history,
vardı. Onlar
and
bile
even though I've taken them at a much larger, much larger.
Tabii ama şöyle bir şey, Ali de söyledi, siz de söylediniz. Burada zaten maksat bu
So
programlarda
the purpose
meseleleri
here is
tüketmek
not
değil.
to
Meselelerin çok ana
finish these
aksları var.
topics, like
Oralara
to
da
get to
çok
the bottom of it, but to
bence
to touch upon the
bütünlüklü,
contours, main
sayıcı bir
contours,
şekilde temas
and
ettiniz. Yani
to
biz
İnsanlar
o
öyle.
yeah,
kavrayışı
we
eğer
think that
zenginleştirip derinleştirebilirsek
so
bu programlar
this
amacına ulaşmış olacak.
these programs
Yani
will
biz
have led to their purpose if
doğası
we can
itibariyle
get to
sınırlı
the
bir
grasp the
varlığız.
contours
Efendim,
of these
kullandığımız
topics.
enstrümanlar sınırlı.
Our
Temas
instruments
ettiğimiz,
are
yöneldiğimiz
limited.
alanlar bir
Our
perspektifle ilgili, bakış açısıyla
our
ilgili.
perspective, our
Dolayısıyla
angle of view.
yani biraz haddimizi bilir isek
If we
mesafe
know our
almamız,
limits, we
mesafeyi
can
iyi almamız mümkün
get
olabilir.
Şöyle bir
somewhere.
şey de var. Yani bazı insanlar
There's also something like this, that there are
sanat
some people
kabiliyetleri vardır.
have
Bazı
artistic
sanat
capabilities,
kabiliyetleri, şiire, tatla filan ama
for example,
anlatım
poetry and
kabiliyetleri o kadar
calligraphy and
yabancı
so on.
alanlara, tasvir
But
alanlarına
my
fazla yönelik değil zannediyorum.
narrative
Onlardan çok
capabilities
kabiliyetli değilim.
not
Fakat
so,
yine de
I
yapabildiğim
suppose.
kadar
But as much as
sanatsal
I
bir
can,
anlatım üslubu benim
trying
olmam
to
mümkün.
like it was
Ama
possible
bu
to
güzel
describe it in
olunca
an
bazen öyle denk
artistic
geliyor,
way.
bazen böyle
But
denk geliyor.
you know, when you do it
Bilmiyorum.
spontaneously, it
Yani
happens either this way or that way. It's like depends.
Adam çıkıyor abi ekrana.
So he
Güzel
goes
güzel
on to
bir şarkı sırıtarak ballandıra
so like he
anlatıyor kardeşim aman bir
describes it
hikayesi, bir
in
fazilet hikayesi. Yok öyle bir şey.
so like some people go out on the screen and he kind of like
Tarihle de
narrates it in
alakası yok.
such a way that it's kind of like well, even if it's got nothing to do with history and history like real history and so on, but like he goes out to on TV and like the way he tells about it and he presents it in such a way that and narrates it in such a way that it's like enjoyable, right?
Muazzam gelişikle uğraştığım meseleler. Öyle.
So the matters that I'm dealing with here, the issues that I'm dealing with are of immense scale, and by trying to summarize it,
mümkün mertebe en kısa biçimde konuyu hulasa etmeye
so I
çalışıyorum.
try to summarize it,
hiçbir
but
şey
it's,
değildir. Sanatta hiç iyi değildir. Anlatımda
summary and narrative is not a good
elimde de
thing.
yani bu kadar hulasa edilirse alanlarda olabilir ama tarihçilikte çok zarar veren bir şey. Yani
So in history, in historical narrative, it's not a good thing to summarize. You have to go into these details and so on. And but the problem is that I don't care and I don't like those details so much. I care about the thought aspect of it. But like,
tenkit yapıp geçtik. Belki hoşunuza gitmiştir sizin konuya yabancı olduğunuz için ama ben doğrusu ben beğenmem yaptığım işleriyle. O da ayrı mesele. Başkalarını beğenmediğim gibi kendimi de
just as I
beğenmiyorum.
don't like others, I don't like myself either.
Bu kadar
So-
artık çizgi sarih olur. Apaçık yalan. Basbayağı beğenir kendisini falan diye de bir gırgır bir şey de yazmıştım. Tenkitlerin tenkidi isimli bu kalemde. Ama yani şimdi meselelerin muazzam müsati altında kim olursa olsun herkesin şeyini, sınırlarını zorlar bu yani o kadar
Tabii.
geniş müsat kalın.
So this is like the scale of this matter would make anyone
içine ilahiyatta dahil, mistik tecrübede dahil,
dwindle,
ilimde dahil, felsefede dahil,
like kind of
dahil, yerine göre
shrink.
her birini bulmak kayıt ve şartıyla ve sınırlarını da iyi takdir etmek, kaydı ihtirazıyla bunlar var benim anlayışımda. Ama o zaman işte iyice insanüstü bir hacme ulaşıyor, sebata ulaşıyor ve mecburen bunları hülasa edeceğim derken sıkıcı olmak gibi bir endişeyi de hep taşıyorum. Keşke daha rahat olsam, alışmadım hala demek ki sizin bu programlara belki zamanla.
Hocam belki bizdeki programda daha cesur olabilirsek sizin de bu konuda daha tatminkar bir programda
Yani biraz tevazu davranıyorum. Çok fazla sınırlar zorlamak istemiyorum. Doğru, ben kendime güvenirim, şeyleri de söylerim ama yani çok da fazla iddialı konuşmayayım. Hadi neyse, insanlar da zaten rahatsız oluyor falan gibi. Biraz da kendime de biraz da sansür de uyguluyorum psikolojik olarak.
Evet.
Aşırı self-consciousness. Kendi kendisinin farkındalık bakımından. Bu arada gereksiz diye.
Biraz da bilmiyorum. Belki de insanlar bazen rahatsız edilmeye müstahak yani. Ben şimdi Avrupa'da da hocam sizin benzeri şeyler var, düşünürler var. Bunlar belki mizaç olarak, duruş olarak sizinle olmayabilir ama yani düşünen insanın bir yalnız bırakılma durumu söz konusu oluyor ve bazen insanı hırçınlaştıran bir şeye de dönüşebilir. işte BBC'nin belgeseli var, Nietzsche belgeseli. Yani çıldırtıyorlar artık adamı. Yani 44 yaşında adam delirmek zorunda kalıyor. Ve
Çok öyle. Wilhelm Reich midir? Wilhelm Reich meşhur psikanalisti,
evet.
Freud'un arkadaşlarından. Adam tımarhanede tamamladı ömrünü.
Aynen.
Ve
Wilhelm Reich ended up
felsefesinde
in
yazar
a
yani
mental
bu kadar
asylum.
insan üzerine gidilse adam çıldırmaz ne yapsın diye böyle bir ifade var.
Evet.
Felsefesindeki Wilhelm Reich maddesinde kardeşim. Böyle oluyor.
Dolayısıyla bazen Facebook'un kendi teknik altyapısıyla ilgili bir kavram vardır. İşte arkadaşını dürt diyor ya hocam.
Ha.
Bazen insanlara dürtmek gerekiyor. Hakikaten yani onun için düşündürüp kelimeleri, seçtiği kelimeler, kullandığı lügatçe ne bileyim hep böyle hoşnut etmeye, hani sizin biraz önceki o televizyondaki tarih anlatımlarda yapmış olduğunuz ballandıra ballandıra anlatma. Ya orada zaten yaptığı şeyin tarih olmadığını o da biliyor ama belki tarihin de tam da hani bugüne dair bir ikmal deposu işlevi görme hususiyeti var.
Maalesef o var, evet.
Yani şimdiki zaman üzerinden bir pozisyona talip olması münasebetiyle tarihi de orada aslında talan ediyor, yağmalıyor veya katlediyor ayrı bir mesele. Ve o
Manipülasyon. Tarihin manipülasyonu.
aynen çarpıtma. Ki ona da aslında bence zımnen siz epey yer verdiniz. O dikkatli izleyicilerimizin de bence
Valla
bu
tarih
ayrıntılar...
modern dünya isimli çok ağır bir yazım vardır. Bir gazetede neşredilmiş, sistemde de var, internette de bulursunuz. Yani bu münevverler ne çok konuşuyorlar bu tarihi hem anlamadan. Tarihçilerin bile çok zor anladığı bir şeydir tarihi. Yani siz ne yaptınız aşkına falan diye gayet sert ifadelerle yani yazdığı bir yazıdır. Enteresan bir yazıdır yani. Yazarken ki üslubum biraz daha mı güzel konuşmamdan ondan emin değilim. Yani daha güzel.
İkisinin de ayrı güzelliği var Şahin Hocam. Bu arada izleyenlere de hatırlatalım. Sizin web siteniz var ki orada altyazıda program esnasında arkadaşlarımız da geçtiler. Şahin Uçar ismiyle. Orada yazılarınızı, hem videolarınızı, söyleşilerinizi, röportajlarınızı toplamışsınız. İstifadeye açık. Yani bazen ben yorumlarda rastladım. Hocamız vesaire diye. Evet yani hocamızın ciddi anlamda oluşturduğu metinler var. O metinlere de tabii ulaşmak mümkün. Yoksa bizim bu söyleşimizde zaten bütün konuyu Abdülbaki'nin dediği gibi şansı ve ihtimalimiz yok. Bazen biz eleştiriliyoruz bu başlıklandırmayla ilgili Şahin Hocam. Bence haksız eleştiriliyoruz. Neden tarih felsefesi üzerine gibi geniş bir başlık tercih ettiniz? Veya neden eğitim üzerine? Ya biz burada konunun spesifik bir alt başlığında ne bileyim uzmanlık, hassaslaşma veya bir seminer katılımcısına bilgi, malumat yetiştirme kaygısıyla bu programı icra etmiyoruz ki. Ama aynı hani Abdülbaki'nin söylediği gibi ve sizin program
Şahin Uçar'ın işte bir tarih tecrübesi var. Bir tarih
evet.
tecrübesi var. Bir tarih tecrübesi. Her neyse